어디니 나제네 지레세 다다 뇌세디 가르 요스네 딘진 가사 딘진 데라 안에 가사 템마마토보토 별로디 뉴고레스 자다 딘녀바이자 가사 네 템마마토보토 별로디 야 곰지야 똑같이 슉처처 심배네 안에 가사 딘진디 마 슉충충으로 안에 사본에 저거 매와 차로 그래스 디 매와 차고 춘이레스 너도스네 가상한 저디 제 디나시 미다바도 별로디 대다 내 따바지며 따생 강사 미다바도 별로다 강사 따바지며 따진 진다 온 것을로래 제상한 저기 미다바 강사들 랑 강사다 풍보라서 미다바 삼다면에 미다바도 별로디 야 슉슉슉 줘도 아니 가서 강사다 풍보 따바지며 따진게 마 슉슉슉 줘그래스 제가 되네자 안 도스체네 아주 공부를 해서 가서 뒤고 쉬러다.
Good morning. Last night, continuing to look at the text on page 23, we looked at these terms that we started to see in the weekend before, the refuter and refuted, from the quotation from Padanavatika. We looked at several illustrations, one of which is that the refuter is the wisdom that realizes that the person is empty of existing by way of its own nature, and what is being refuted is a directly contradictory consciousness, a consciousness which has a contradictory manner of apprehension, namely the ignorance that is grasping at the person as existing by way of its own nature. So these two, one being wisdom, one being ignorance, are completely opposite, completely contrary in the way they apprehend their object, the person. And therefore, as our wisdom, which is in accordance with reality, grows and strengthens, the contrary ignorance proportionately weakens. And as we develop our wisdom through hearing and reflecting and meditating, we will eventually eradicate all our afflictions together with their seeds. So this is the sequence of progression that one is striving to achieve. And as we develop our wisdom, naturally, our ignorance weakens. And it also gave an illustration linking to what we looked at in the previous weekend of two contrary minds. The ignorance that grasps at the person as being permanent, and the contrary consciousness is the wisdom understanding the subtle impermanence of the person. So here too, the relationship is the same. As one develops an understanding of subtle impermanence, naturally our grasping at permanence weakens.
Alright, that is asa dine jada ngan jugi garsungor sentilia ngan jugila nyomong ki ngan zo kanga yo dunga yo chasan leda nyomong ba la tin ligore chesa nyomong ba di meba su ko gore nyomong ba nane ge zawa di ga sen denze marik pa sia de chesa di meba su ko gore di meba su ya di da meba su ga di re sa jang juge dang zo nyomong ba dunga yo ya ki dunga yo gyu di pa ngo song che 다디 매바 간에 수요고를 납나 다디 매바 수요발라 데니기 딘진드나 진당우수 개위로디 곰네 아니 매바 수는 마도 진당우수 마개위로 로샨다 람로 개와 카르콤바이나 디 매바 수투 말해스 진당우수 개위로지 곰제 딘진드 매바 수는 마도 진당우수 마개위로지 아니 개와로시 카르콤바이네 고 딘진드 매바 수투 말해스 제자다 진당우수 딘진데다 진당우수 개위로디 카레스네 동의도 별로디레스 지나다 동의도 별로도 공발할때네 아니 가지고 녀모바데 덴진이 매바스요 거리 덴진 매바스나 아니 녀모바 매바스요 녀모바 매바스나 아니 랭가 바사게 말아 랭가 바마서나 디왕게 아니 코발에 끼발링게 말아 디 코발에 끼와면나 안 동아요 말해서지 당하줄이야 지사 동아요야기 동아요 유자와디 파디레다 성어송 다디 디 매바스요 발라 동방이 또 로디곰네 매가서 고리 사데 님보디 방아줄이야 뭐저제 지나디 당 뭐저제 도 제반자 당한조 고미야데 가르고선 동방이 삼다 동방이 제바제 동방이 또 로디곰 고리 사데 난 언제 숨고로 와다
Moreover, we looked at last night, how all suffering, pain and misery that we experience from both the slight to the intense comes about independent on the karma that we have accumulated, which is contaminated due to having been accumulated under the influence of the afflictions. So all our suffering comes about through this sequence. And our afflictions have at their root, so there's a wide variety of afflicted minds, which all have one root, the ignorance of true grasping. This we need to come to not just intellectually understand, but truly recognize for ourselves. Because this will give us the determination to eradicate the root. Because when that root is clearly identified, we know that by severing it, no results will follow. That whole chain will be broken. So therefore, we need to meditate on emptiness. And why emptiness in particular? Because as we saw in the text, it's through developing a directly contradictory, a consciousness with a directly contradictory manner of apprehension that we can eradicate the former consciousness. And wisdom has a directly contradictory manner of apprehension to ignorance. So by developing, to the extent we develop our ignorance, our wisdom, we weaken our ignorance. And this is a process that happens naturally. And as the wisdom the ignorance weakens, the resulting afflictions weaken in their strength and their frequency, and therefore the karma they lead to also weakens. And eventually, one will eradicate the ignorance completely, destroying the possibility of afflictions arising, because their cause has been eradicated. So ignorance can only be eradicated through cultivating wisdom, no matter how strong one develops love and compassion and so forth. Because love and compassion and other consciousnesses, unlike wisdom, they do not have a manner of apprehending the object that is directly contradictory to that of ignorance. So therefore, it's imperative we come to understand, and whilst coming to understand, we meditate on reality, on the emptiness of inherent existence.
soso rang gyula nyomo ji mar soso rang nyomo ma ke na soso lenga ba sa ga soso lenga ma sa na ane ke wa chimba lenga so ji soso dunga tar tu buri eche je sa da di nga soso rang gyu gi tenzin marik ba di me ba so wala soso rang ge dong ba yi do ji gom je ane soso rang me ba so buri eche da soso rang ge nyomo be de me ba so sha ba na mi shanda ge nyomo ge soso le ne tu gure sen ne ya ma ka nga ja ya ma le ji ro da mi shanda soso rang da nyomo ba sa ba ne mi shanda ge nyomo be khon ro da de sha la so ba kre che fe ne nga so le ne ya ma ho so so ki hen de ma do da nga zu ge nyomo ba ma bang ba yin na ane mi shanda ge khon ra la ji nyomo ba ti gi nga so ne ge ne tu gure sa mi shanda khon la de nga zo na sa khon la gu ro che sa nga so ka nga ti ge ro de ne za ne tu gure che de ne za soso rang yu tenzin di meba so ba lo soso rang ge dong ba yi do ji gom je ne meba so gu le che san di meba so je na de ne soso rang ge nyomo ba cha sa meba so ba ne nyomo ba shan da shan gi yu le nyomo ba ka zhe ne soso ne du ma le ta soso gi nyomo ba de meba ma so ba na ane soso gi nyomo ba de ya je mi shan da ge nyomo ba ge kong ro ge de nga zo kong ro de ya la ru ro ane la je ne soso ya ka ga de da du de nga ba sa ya de ne gu le de ne za da nga zo gi nyomo ba soso rang ge gi da du ha ya za wa de ga wa du sin soso rang du ma de mi shan da mi du a che za me ba za da me ba so ya de soso rang ge me ba so gu le se ro ba da.
As mentioned in the previous segment, we need to come to recognize this sequence, that our unwanted suffering of any magnitude comes from ripening karma, which was accumulated by the afflictions, which came from the root cause of the ignorance of true grasping. So there's a sequence of dependency, of cause and effect. This we need to recognize so that we can then have the clear motivation to focus on eradicating our ignorance of true grasping by cultivating the opposing wisdom and understanding reality. Here now, to talk about, to expand this a bit further, it's only it is the ignorance on our consciousness, our own ignorance of true grasping, that leads to the arisal of our own afflictions and the accumulation of karma that leads to our uncontrolled rebirth in samsara. This we need to understand, that it's our ignorance on our continuum. The ignorance on the continuum of others does not directly lead to us remaining in samsara. Therefore, our focus needs to be on eradicating our ignorance. And when we eliminate our own ignorance, we will break this entire sequence of the afflictions, and we'll be freed of afflictions. But that will not directly free other beings from their afflictions. So by eradicating our ignorance of true grasping, we eradicate any potential arisal of afflictions on our continuum. But others who still are under the control of ignorance will therefore have afflictions continuously arising. That being said, though, the position we are in now is that we are afflicted beings. The afflictions readily and regularly ripen. When we are in the company of other ordinary beings like ourselves, through their arisal of afflictions, and in particular the expression of them through physical, verbal communication, that serves as a cause for the arisal of our own afflictions. So in this way, there is an interdependency between the afflictions on the continuum of another and ourselves. However, when we come to eradicate our ignorance and therefore all our afflictions, we can move in society freely. No matter who we encountered, how afflicted they are, their afflictions cannot serve as a cause for the arisal of our own afflictions, because the root of our afflictions has been eradicated. And in this way, we can move freely with others, unhindered, undisturbed by afflictions, because we have attained freedom from them, liberation from them.
단 참마도 쇠마도 원나 안는 간조 강발 마수에게 탑람 가려 열었으네 간조 한국 지도 파티 야보 요현지 관제 한국 관샤바이나 가와 조베네 강발 수뉴 말했어 참마 수뉴 말했어 삐삐로 뒤로 어디나신 삐디나신 샹기 녀목에 갈뉴고선 샹기 녀목 받다 소소게 자워레서 메바 수는 쇠 차요 말했어 아니 델레 안 소소 라랑기 냠렌제 소소 유세베 냠렌제 소소 유기 녀모데 메바 쇠바이나 아니 한국 공부도 지바레스 녀모바 미샤다 콘로다 녀모가 제네 소소 뉴트 말레스 지산 베디나시레스 지베 디송고로와 준준나레.
This important point that I've just made was made so eloquently by Shantideva in engaging in Bodhisattva's way of life. He gives a vivid account of a world where the ground is rough and coarse, filled or covered by sharp stones and thorns. If we try to sweep and clear away the entire world of thorns and sharp stones, we'll never be able to finish this task. Whereas on the other hand, if we put on shoes, we can go anywhere undisturbed. And this is making eloquently the same point I just mentioned, which is that if we focus on the faults of others, if we see others as our enemy, we will never attain a state of freedom, because around us there will be beings perturbed or disturbed by their afflictions. And if we are seeing them as our enemy, we will always be surrounded by enemies. So this is likened to the ground being covered with thorns and sharp stones. But if on the other hand, we put on leather sandals, we subdue our own mind, and in particular we eradicate our own ignorance, this then is like walking through the world with shoes on. We will be unperturbed. We will experience no suffering, no arising of afflictions, and we'll be able to readily engage with others. So this is a key point to settle in one's mind.
Niji doba kasore, Dui dunga chagi misela sidi, Nanzu gila nyomo badike, Sanyegi, and chagi su lenje, Dene meva su tuyayo mares. And the ganes meva sugri lamna, Ni kyonzole lamdun jigres, Dene digo, Nyemba digo lam digom gores, and a lamdun labgres, Ding a lamdun jishabadi, Soso Rangi, Nyamlen jeje, Ungomba ina, Dene nyoma batu gres. Ni doba shenla pime, chunyi tenpa tenpa chuwasi. Nge yun tende kyonzo le teje, kyongi nyomo meba seje, nge yun tende kyonzo teje, ane kyonzo kaipa chimo sui tuyayo mares. Chisa nge karasane, chunyi tenpa tenpa side, tenpa nyi namsha, tongpa nyi ten, tenji ki lam dikyo gomba ka tablam di tuyanche, nge ma labji kya di tuyangi res. Di tuyangi kyonzo ki sosora nyamlen cheba ina, tende nyomo bala choy tukuri res. That is so, There's a
complementary famous verse from a sutra where, bearing in mind what Shantideva also taught, the Buddha taught that I cannot wash away the suffering of beings with water. I cannot remove their negativities with my hands. I cannot bestow my realizations upon you. The only way I can help is by teaching, and you striving to liberate yourself. So the Buddha here is making the same point that Shantideva made 1,000 years later, which is that we need to subdue our own minds. The Buddha and his lineage of great teachers have presented the methods for doing so. And it is up to us to apply ourselves, to cultivate those ways of thinking within ourselves. And to the extent that we strive to develop these virtuous paths within ourselves, we will progress to and eventually attain liberation. That is how freedom from suffering is achieved.
Lobsang Dorje chue pa Lobsang Dorje 제가 퇴 년 삼다 도 장고 그래서 Lobsang Dorje 송고로 제가 네 Lobsang Dorje 송도 Lobsang 마제나 나 저기 녀모모 방타다 가르가 녀모바 간스 간에 요래 될니 뭐 간스 띵거 바디 신 말와 제가 다 최날 마 송지 파 Lobsang Dorje 파 장도지 장을 겁라 아주 녀모바 된데 삼는 된데 요래 디 녀모바 되게 빠야래 녀모 된데 곰고래서 차사디 대 싱그러와 대신배네 소소라게 냠내지는 녀모모 빠두고 제가 되는자 아니 Lobsang Dorje 계신분에 사주를 봐 지금 숑 다과다기 지금 Lobsang Dorje 계신분에 소야디 김선디로 와다 다디서 차사 된다는 말씀 집어 차기도 와.
And as students of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you will have heard him make the same point in every teaching. He, in every teaching, encourages students to study. Study, study, study. Hear teachings, reflect on them, gathering ever more knowledge and information. Hear the same teachings again and again so as to integrate them Because if we, as his students, have not identified clearly the breadth of the sufferings of samsara, as well as their causes, namely the afflicted minds and their root cause of ignorance, as well as how to eradicate the root cause, ignorance, and how do we have any hope of attaining freedom? Without that knowledge, what are we going to meditate on? We'll have nothing to integrate within ourselves. So therefore, His Holiness makes the same point that Buddha Shakyamuni did in that sutra quote, as well as Shantideva. We need to make effort ourselves, gather knowledge, and integrate that.
진짜 멜론은 마땅해도 가서 동디와 카르카르에메 야블로디와 카르야메 쪽바로 거에도메 차사하고도 그라 되네 하고네 되네 여바네 디바장마서야 어데데네 나고스도 디쪽바도 장마서야 디 용구로 장마서 투고라 멜론 마땅나 디와 나고보다 쪽고 거에네 디 하모도 미션다도 어데 쪽바 슈디디 섬그로와 제장가서 하고 두고 말아 제장 나주 수볼이야 안 jak바다 쪽바 가데 예메 니치기 gyuen karayo madi melon la tan ha khutu gures pe dina shi nga zo sem na lo gyuen gi cha karadu yuen din ye kha cha karadu no chu kan shu di jadi kawal de pe ji lo chon che ban ha khutu gures sisan pe ji di nga zo ge sem gi gyuen thong ya da gyuen di me ba so ye ge tablam de gi melon na shi di sem gi gyuen sha ya di pe ji de le tan ha gures sisan pe ji pa du su ta de ane sem de ne shi na ane di ane nyomo bare di nugo bare di nurture esaja anjesa sem dene chiyo baina ndigi ane gasore sem nyomo bare meba so tukuri esaja jesa di peji nala pa hago tugo bare jesa peji di nga zo ge sem gi gyuen na sem gi yuan dian sem gi gyuen se ya dan sem gi yuan dian ya gong pe de da ya ge tong ya dan ya le ya ane melon na xin chi da de peji de res go wa da.
For any of us to know whether there is dirt on our face, we cannot know this on our own. We require the assistance of something else, usually a mirror. If we have no access to a mirror, we will walk around society in a manner that is inappropriate. Similarly, we need knowledge, which comes from the teachings of the Buddha and his great students, to know about the condition of our own mind, to understand the current state of our own mind and how to transform it. So the Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha and his students, serve as a mirror to ourselves. And this is how we should relate to the teachings, to hear them and think about them in relation to the current situation of our own mind and how to transform it.
어디네 인자다 저기 난다라 가는 셈지 녀모 버릭데 매바 쇠고리 디 매바 쇠발라 아니 디 자위기 된진 디 매바 쇠발라 동방이 또 별로디 진당 오속이 별로디 검치 매바 쇠고리에지 안데도 직슈가라 다데네 인자다 안다 진당 오속이 별로디 공부하는 녀모 버데 매바 쇠 투구리 별라네 저 투구리에서 그러다 다 인비 투비 김정에 갈 송거선 된마 공부르기 아니 야 상유 점된데리야 뼈부에 추인 뼈바 세지 엔디나라 가르송고라스네 추인 뼈발레스 지데르미 다비고 나서 팀에 팀마젠 지데르미 낭죽나 아니 팀마치기로 고민 따라스
As been presented quite clearly thus far in this section, this outline, we have to eradicate our ignorance of grasping at the self and phenomena as existing in the way that they appear. And the method to do so is to cultivate the wisdom realizing that phenomena are all empty of existing by way of their own nature. Develop the wisdom realizing emptiness. And it has also thus far been asserted that we can do this. This is not beyond any of us. Now, His Holiness, through starting with quotations from Nagarjuna, presents the reasons why this is possible for all of us. So turning to the text in the middle of page 23, we have two quotations from Nagarjuna's praise of the element of superior qualities. So looking at the first verse, just as armor is cleansed by fire from the various contaminations staining it, when placed in a fire, its contaminations are burnt, but the armor is not.
아니 치수 아니 제 디마디 주 고교 자디거 고디 바르와 아도 디마 코롱기 뭐라 아니 고요 코롱기 라이 뭐딜 아니 디마디 메바레스 에베 디르와 당아서 둘로로 당보 까버르진 사바 사장 되는데 장리 까버지어와 디 권진한 바지 때에서 야마도 두와 바자고 된 때서做나고 차야다 디네 자기 자저로와 어디나시 고요데 장 당보 코롱 장마 장게데 코롱 뭐라 안 잡아요 말이지 제가 디 권제 파수도 야마지지를 안 잡아도 고용 그래서 지단 디니기 지단 미 답요 고요 나서 디마 찬스 디니기 디마 망보 쪼바 예딩이 지세로와 다 지단 미 나주나 디마 치고 고요민 따라서 지단 디니기 잡고 고요 되긴 디마 고요 되긴 둘로디 메나마 자샤바네 메나 자데 메 칭요도 디마데 사람에가 차로 그래 고에데 치고 말해서 지데르 미 나주나 디마 치고 디마데 메가 치고 그래서 고에 민다라서 고에데 치 말해서 제사 대시 고에데려야 잡아 고교데 메가 쇠데 메 치나 안에 고메 당샤도 메기 디마데 차사 메가 쇠지만 고요 그런 메가 쇠면 와서 제사 디가르제 바래라나 대시 디마데 고요 그런 게 뭐라 요 말해서 진짜 치수련에 잡아 고교로와 디네자 메바스 두고 그래서 다 고요 그런 뭐랑라 잡아치 고에데바나 고에데 메바마스는 디마디 메바스 돼야 말해서 진짜 디니기 고요 가서 메치비 고에데려야 가서를 디마 고교디 대시 고요 그런 게 뭐라 요 말해서 한 상다된데 도시네 한 지수 잡아 못 차바래서 진짜 디멜 당시 메나 치샤바이네 메나 다샤바이네 고에디 작화의 마치 지마디 마치제 고에디 하기리 해서 제상 고에디 양 장마 차로 그래서와 내디 베디 뒤숨으로와
Just as armor is cleansed by fire from the various contaminations staining it. It's just like we don't tend to wear armor very often, but wearing our clothes around town, we notice that they very quickly get dirty. But we can wash our clothes, and they'll once again be clean and look like new. And the reason why our cleaning of our clothing can be successful is because the dirt is not within the very essence of those clothes, and therefore can be removed without the clothes being harmed. And so too, in the case of armor, when armor becomes contaminated, it can be cleansed by a skilled blacksmith using fire. And because the contaminations are not in the essence of the armor, they can be removed through fire without the armor being harmed. And it continues. When placed in a fire, its contaminations are burnt, but the armor is not. So here what we see is that despite being placed in fire, the armor is not harmed. It is only purified.
근데 나고로시 고베네 당보 가보 가냐라 나고 매래 아주 파수도 디지데 나고 수 고베로와 지산 디 고교대 안 저기 지기 이제 겹치야 주베네 근데 가보 나고마 지게 장마샤제 니 가보 다가라 하도 가보 하 나고 매바 차로 그러와 제투고 주 차이거와 지산 디 가르세는 나고디 디지 레 가보 코로 몰라 나고 매바래 매반자고 치수 잘 되바 인자고 见贤的见见过来拿不是国王，咱可没把水吐过了的。但人搞不可能，我可能搞不的人咱，人搞不的没把水了，人可能没把水呢，搞不没把水吐也没了的。就是人搞不的搞不是没把水这个人就他有的别是呢。第来没了，大家是呢，个人可能我可能搞不成，但搞不没有差所以人也没有差多了。其实今年咱别的呢，像就他同学去帮他们读了主要了吧，对吧？俺的呢也是多，俺别呢，俺这个读了个说的，卡拉水的，个不样就读了咧，起码就卡拉个起码就水最多。真的，但每次把谁每次的那么没了没呢，你们差不多那吧，读了怕，今年把账这个下回呢，俺刚上这个呀。这个样子，对那个什么的，你们的追个，什么的业主啊，差多啊，的那些，他的就咱的生活，就等到宁波了，开始我是呢，别的规定了，什么规矩的，可让心的要嘛的规定了，让心的什么的要嘛的是，萝卜我见先就这个什么的规划的是，让心的什么的可以的呗呢，热的他就什么的没把水土也要嘛的是，没有嘛的是。就是他让心的规定了呀，这么的没办法，这么的萝卜为见先的对不起，个这么的规定办法，那这个见先的对不起，那个这么的没办法水土的也是别的生活是吧的。
When one wears white clothing in particular, one notices how quickly it gets dirty. But the essence of this white clothing is that its color white. It's not a different color such as a brown or black. And therefore, even if the clothing gets covered in dirt, its essence remains the color white, and therefore, by washing, the dirt, that color, can be removed. The color of the dirt can be removed, and the whiteness will once again shine through. And another illustration that I have more familiarity with myself is not wearing white clothing, is that when I do a lot of cooking, then my robes, they absorb the smell of the food. But if I then hang my robes outside in fresh air, then quite quickly the warmth and the freshness of the air will enable the smell of the cooking to dissipate from my robes. And the reason with both illustrations is the same. In the case of my robes, the smell of cooking is not within the essence of my robes, and therefore they can be removed. So the meaning is that contaminations are adventitious. They are not in the nature of the white clothing, of my robes, or of the armor.
那这些别的轮到了个轮的个生活上天嘛生活人，地心为色为以心，对下来说怎么讲？那一些没怎么说？定义为什么有脑子？
That first verse from Nagarjuna was setting the stage, giving an illustration. Now we come to the meaning with in the second verse that is quoted. Similarly, the mind of clear light, having contaminations such as attachment, such contaminations are burnt by the fire of exalted wisdom, but its nature, clear light, is not.
那地心是别地心说的，但为啥为心是的？俺这个心的让心的了，不能让心为啥话的是？让心被脏嘛的是？可是牛毛吧，让心牛毛吧，马修吧，让心牛毛吧，心的呀，有嘛的，心哪来有嘛的？而且让心为啥为心可能像俺这个心可能让心的牛毛吧，马修吧，让心心的让心了牛毛吧，有嘛的是？就啥的？ 本来被为啥话是这边，这就让心的牛毛被起码这个毛个吧，脏嘛这么个大把的事情，为啥话的事？
Similarly, the mind of clear light. Here we see. So this is referring to the very nature of our mind. The nature of our mind is and always has been pure, free of the afflictions, It has never been contaminated by their afflictions, but is and always has been and remains and will remain pure from contaminations.
나 디네나 지자 나는 아주게 셈리게 랑신랴 뇨모베게 디마디 마슈바이나 나는 아주게 되샤 콘조 나야 마릭바세 망부 여러 와서 뇨모 망부 와서 되샤라서 디마찬스 디마 여러 와서 여바이나 디네게 뇨모 망부 여러데 디 뇨모와디 로보와레스 로보와 긴 셴유다 긴지 채발레 디네 긴지 채여도 견델라 때는 가서 되샤기 용거래 견델라 너 콘트기 용거래 내가게 기고래스 제자디죠 규다 긴 현실을 되네 누구래스 아주게 되샤 콘트 녀모바디 제 랑신지 셴 갈라에 마도바 랑거 뇌네 되샤기야 말에 셈나 되셔요 말에 랑 규다 긴 갈라에 마도바제 랑신지 가서 셈려 콘트 되샤 아니 셰당 가서래 나야 마릭바데네 가게요 말레스 지산데 매나야 나 가르치길한테 통 콘트게 여러 되자게 나게게도 마릭바게도 가서 지기도 하라네 귀단 긴 현실을 되네 주고래스 현실을 되네 주고한서 될 로보와레스 로보와 가브리 여봐 가브리 매봐 그 된자 매봐세 그 가브리 귀단 긴지 채나 되자게 용으로 귀단 긴지 채나 콘트게 용으로 귀단 긴지 채나 마릭바게 용으로 귀단 긴지 마테나 콘트게 말레스 규단 긴 콘르기에 규단 긴 마텐다 콘르기게 말해. 되샤기에 규단 긴데 마텐다 되샤기게 말해. 제가 나중에 녀모바 쳐서 로보와래 셈게 랑신라 녀모바되게 요 말해서 대신가서 고액이 고액값이 랑신델라 아니 디마 나고디 매바 나신 셈게 랑신라 녀모바 아니 되샤 콘라라서 랑신기 매바래서 랑신기 셈게 녀모바 매바래서
The very nature of our mind is free of contaminations. Contaminations here refers to afflictions, such as attachment. So we see here, similarly, the mind of clear light having contaminations such as attachment. So these contaminations, such as attachment, are not in the nature of the mind. They are adventitious or temporary. And how can we assert that they are adventitious? Is because they're not being in the nature of the mind, they are not ever present. They arise dependently, independent on causes. They are not part of the nature of the mind. Only when causes are encountered does a particular affliction ripen. Whilst those causes are absent, that affliction does not ripen. Therefore, being dependent, it is not in the nature of the mind. Just like a clean an item of clothing, of white clothing, remains clean until it meets the causes for it to become contaminated, to become dirty. And this is because contaminations or dirt are not in the essence of the cloth. So too, the nature of our mind is free of all contaminations. The afflictions, the contaminations though, they are adventitious, they are temporary. They are known to be temporary because without causes they do not arise. With causes, they only then do arise.
Jima lobo wares, Tingyamo Betimati, Lobo, Gudan, Kin, Shenji, Dune, Tugumata, Semge Ranshin La, and Semge Ranshin, Tima Mashuba, Yomares. Mevanzada, Semge Ranshin La, Dimach Yobaina, Dimashudibaina, then Dimani Mevas to Yomare, Gana Matuba, Dambo in the same Juyo, the Yomobachi, Ranshin, you call Sem, the Yum the Yedivaza, go to Mevas to Yomare. She's not that Ranshin La Mashuba in the 로보가 와래 규단 긴 현라tin 줍두가 지래 진짜 디네서 로보 완전 거 매봐서 두고 그래스 제가 매봐서 두고 그래스 간에스 매봐서 그래서나 예시미 디마세 디니외사 마이노 시도 제가 당한저 뇨모바 되샤랑 콘로 아니 지게 마릭바디 대시기 차상 뇨모게 주제에 마릭바디 다디 매봐 간에스 그래서네 대시 매나신 뇨모바디 디마티시 다데 메나신데 가르rellam나 동방이 또 비시지. 제가 동방이 또 비시 공묘도 이시 공발할 때네 덴진 마릭 빠지고 매가서요 그래서 덴진 마릭 봐서야도 아니 내가 때네 계획이 되셔 콘도 나야 차상매가 자로 그래서 제가 진짜 동방이 또 로이시 공발할 때네 아니 디마디게 차상 매가서 그래서 이시 미 디마삭스 메기 대시 미 디마디 세바나시 이시 디게 동방이 또 비시 공발할 때네 아니 뇽모베 디마 차상 매가서 그래서 이시 미 디마삭스
I want this to be really clear. The afflictions or the contaminations are not in the nature of the mind. They are adventitious. And the reason for this is because they are dependent on causes. If they were in the nature of the mind, they would not be dependent. Moreover, if they were in the nature of the mind, they couldn't be eradicated without eradicating mind itself. But they are, though, adventitious, temporary, which means they can be eliminated. So there's here a sequence of points being made. Firstly, the contaminations, the afflictions are adventitious. They are not in the nature of the mind. And this is shown because they are dependent arisings. So therefore, they cannot be in the nature of the mind because they come and go dependent on causes. If they were in the nature of the mind, they could not be eradicated because the mind itself then would be eradicated. And then thirdly, being adventitious, being temporary, they can be eliminated. And how so? This then is in the third line. Such contaminations are burnt by the fire of exalted wisdom. We've seen already in the earlier presentations that all our afflictions, anger, attachment, and so forth, all come from ignorance of true grasping. And by severing that root cause, all resulting afflictions will have to cease. Without the cause, a result cannot follow. So in this way, the fire of exalted wisdom, of the wisdom realizing emptiness, is able to eradicate all contaminations, all afflictions.
Dini Yusa Mahino, Chesada, Dongbangi to be loy, Yembo, Dongbangi to be loju, Gomche, Gomyodu, and Jima, Yomo Badike, Chasam Meva Sugore, in a Dini, Sim Ranki, Sem Koron, more Serik some the Meva Sugurbe and Meva Sugo Mariache, Chesan Dini Yusa Mahino, Wesa was said, Sim Girancho, more such in Rigsam day. Chesadi, call Hagores, Chesa, Yomoba Chasa, Meva Suyodu, Sim Yuki, Yomobriti Meva Suyodu, Sim Rangi Mo, Sasam, Rigsam, Sashin, Damwati, Hagores, Dilagores, Chesa Dini, Vesamai knows.
The verse concludes, but its nature, clear light is not. So reading them together, such contaminations, in other words afflictions, are burnt by the fire of exalted wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness. But its nature, the nature of the mind, clear light, is not. This was mentioned in relation to the preceding line. The wisdom realizing emptiness, through eradicating its the consciousness that is the directly contradictory manner of apprehending its object, the ignorance of true grasping, by eradicating that, all resulting afflictions are eliminated. But the nature of the mind is not harmed at all because none of those afflictions were ever in the nature of the mind. The very essence of the mind, its clear and knowing, remains unharmed, unchanged by the wisdom realizing emptiness. This exalted wisdom cleanses, purifies the contaminations from the mind, but the nature of the mind remains, or the essence of the mind, remains clear and knowing.
When I Chike Sukuyago Mik Tango Mixeo Shuchevene, and the Chike Regi Pa, Miktipa, Kapchipa, Damjipa, Damshashabene, that Harriorsen, Mikti, Mikoron Sewu Orde, and Chilo Yugan Tungmarwa, the Matonwa, Mikoron Gumarwa, 가르교는 딕파 값이 레다 되니까 값이 되수 교는 Tene re da mi kap che hutu re ge tam shabane kibu yo ma kanga yo ro da chike de chukchen bo tam shabane des ma de wa da kanga yo de mi ga ya ma don bu sto bo ra shu shu ro ba da re de pa chik pa shi je pa shi shabane tene chike de shi kanga de ge chasan su bu le de na chik da yu ga na se wu shu cho de chik twa ji yo ro ba on pe di na ji da pe di na shi nga zo da de sem ge ra shin di Some reason, Ho Sewu, Shiuchi, Chek, Gayang, Osum, Dotuye, Nuba Yikni Rede, in a Garichavas, Deja, Condro, Nyomo, Marikba, Disupa, Dumje, Mikasha Banaja, Conjugu Dum, and Disugu Nuba Basha, the name Dumje to your Reche. Jazan, the Nigi Anjugi, Red, Migi Redi, Pau. Gosha Banashin, that it Decha, Condong, Maya Maripati, Nyomo Bacha Mevasu, Nyomo Saban Chasa Mevasu, and Nyomo Bacha Chasa Mevasu, and the same such in Ribati, you can see the Chasang Mosum Tong, yes. Chasang Mosum Tong, then Devani Devara Chaka, Chesa, Tamji Kempin, Namkin said, Che Tamji Kempa said, the Chagore, Chesa Nyomo Big, the she don't buy you to look Gomba, like then Nyomo Tima Basha, Java, Bounce away, and Meva Chadu, to your same Sesam Rixam Modi, Che Tamji Mosum Toyong, Chesa Namkin Tamji Kempa said Charo, Chesa Dineza, that Che Tamji Kempa Chadu, and the Gun Tamji that Java and the Lule Game, Semnaka, didn't think it Deva, and Sanji Copa said it is Chagore, don't that this more.
The position that we find ourselves in now is someone who is like someone who has a blindfold over their eyes. They are blind. They cannot see the world. But as soon as that blindfold is lifted, the world opens up before them, and they can see all variety of objects. They can see clearly. There was never a fault with their sight. The fault was that their vision was obscured, was blocked by the presence of this blindfold. This is the position we find ourselves in. The essence of our mind is clear knowing, but it is veiled or obscured by the afflictions. But as soon as these afflictions, particularly together with their seeds and stains, are removed, then our consciousness now has no veil obscuring it. And all phenomena, every single object, can be directly realized, directly perceived. Every single phenomenon can be directly observed. And this is the situation for a Buddha. Their omniscient consciousness can perceive all phenomena simultaneously because the veil of the afflictions and their seeds and imprints has been completely eradicated. Their mind has been completely, perfectly purified.
다 녀몽 바샤데 저 빵투그레 딥투그레 그래서는 그 로보와레스 귀단 진현질을 되는 주어마다 랑신지 호여바 말레스 랑신 주비어 말레스 지상하는 셈리야 아니 랑신지 녀몽 바디 요 말레스 지바 요 말레스 지상 요바디게 진현 로보와레스 지상다 진현 로보와서 고 메바스 투야레스 지상 진현을 되는 주어는 진현질 되는 고 메바스 투그레스 김sen직 고 로보와레스 디마티 로보와레스 김sen직 티쇼 베능아서 상기 투그레베서 상기 투그레 나서 디마빵 투그레 디마빵 투기 김sen가서 디마티 로보와레스 김sen직 티쇼 김sen직라 셈게 라실야 디마 슈요 마레스 셈게 라실레 디마 메바레스 라실레 디마 마슈바자 아니 디마티 로보와자 메바스요 디 상기고 투그레스 제나 디김sen이 차고레 될래 디마티 로보와레스 직제 다 찍라 셈게 랑실레 디마 슈요 마레스지 김제니제 다 김저 숨바데 가르쳐 그랬으네 녀모 디마들이야 Nyembo Topdan Temba Yores, Nyembo. Topdan Temba Nuba Chimbo, Nyembo de Yores. Nyembo. Nyomobagi, Nyembo, Topdan Temba Yores. Digares, Tony Dube Shera Tirua. Chizan Kazane, Tinangosuka, Dikomba, Meva Sudura Shera, Chizam. Timon Lobo Wigile, Nyembo, Topdan Temba Yores. And then Dimokoro Lobo Wares. And the same Giranjin La Dima Mashubares. The Inza, Mazu Meva Sim Tima Meva Sudico Sanjo Topures. Did you go Gumse, this word?
Now let's look at the question of, can we attain the state of Buddhahood? So this is, to attain the state of Buddhahood, all the afflictions, together with their seeds and their imprints, need to be eradicated completely. The mind needs to be cleansed, purified from the afflictions, their seeds and imprints. So that is what needs to be done to achieve the state of Buddhahood. And can we do it? Then is the question. And it's said that all of us can do so. And 3 reasons here are given as to why we can do so. The first being that the afflictions are not in the nature of the mind. The afflictions, their stains and imprints are not in the nature of the mind. Secondly, the afflictions are adventitious, they are temporary, because they arise dependently. Therefore, they can be removed. So the first reason, they are not in the nature of the mind. If they were in the nature of the mind would be, if the afflictions were removed, the nature of the mind would be destroyed and there'd be no mind. But they are not in the nature of the mind. Rather, they veil or obscure the mind, and they are temporary, adventitious. They come and they go, independent on causes, and therefore they can be removed. That's the second reason. The third is that the antidote, the wisdom realizing emptiness, as we saw in the text last night, as well as last week, it is supported by valid cognition and can grow and expand in power and strength, and thereby progressively cut away and eventually eradicate completely the afflictions, seeds, and their imprints. So that's the third reason. So to repeat them again, the reason that we can achieve the state of a Buddha is because the afflictions are not in the nature of the mind. Rather, secondly, they are adventitious because they are dependent arisings. And then thirdly, the antidote, the wisdom realizing emptiness, can grow and expand. Whatever extent of wisdom we have developed thus far, of wisdom understanding reality, that is not the extent of wisdom we can develop. We can develop it to the state of perfection. So for these 3 reasons, we can completely purify the mind of the afflictions, together with their seeds and stains, and thereby achieve the state of a Buddha.
Gymse Dusin and Tarvada San Yokomo to Tubiki and Gymse and this Sungora and Denza Mangajugi Demba San Yumde Dambo Marans Nashiris and the Yomo Boyaka Contra Dosha Yudianes. Chisna Korongi, Denigi, Yamlinjo Gom Japjo Gombala Dene and the Yomo Chasa Meva Su Subare, Sunza and the Tamji San Yokomo Tovares. Chisada San Yumdigi Korongi. Nyama Nyomoba Pongi Yoba Hako, Deniba Nyamlenche, and the Tarba Sanjoko Topne, Koronga Nyamyong Tone, Nantul Matusi Lam to Nangurvada, Nyamyong Tone. That Nyamyong Mevarachina, Denny Yorelamna, that is Tata Imin de Yuruada, in a that is San Yisonye de Korongi, Nyamyong Tone, Korongi, Pekawache, Nyomo, Jik Tambo Lobjonje, Deniba Lobjonjino Gom Jab, Nagama, Lomambo Kawache, Gom Jab. Dene gom jebale dene sanjo ko topsa dene sanjo ko topsane dene ko nyamyon thone ma di dene nyamle che di che wo de ba ya di ji gom ja di de che wo se de malam de chasa di so ya di so ge nyamyon thone ma ha zo le ze yo ge nga ju ge ngānsule tsewa nyingchigi wa ngānsu dunga seyegi duandala ta sanyi khorongi komgebe nyamnyongi rimbati ngānsule odushine sungorwa.
Through reflecting well on those three reasons, we can understand that liberation from suffering in its entirety is possible for us. And moreover, even the omniscient state of a Buddha is entirely possible for us. And a further reason we can look to, certainly to establish this, as well as for inspiration, is that there once, a long time ago, was a very angry person, a person full of attachment and desire and jealousy and rage, but through hearing teachings and slowly over time making effort, but continuously over time making effort, repeatedly over a sustained period, his mind started to transform. Seeing this change within himself, enthusiasm grew, and he applied himself ever more. And more rapidly, his mind transformed, started to be purified in relation or in dependence to the cultivation of all good qualities. And over a period of eons, progressively, he transformed his mind, sequentially purifying it of levels of afflictions through the power of developing good qualities. When those qualities were developed to the point of perfection, all afflictions together with their stains, their seeds and stains, were removed. And Buddha Shakyamuni arose in this world. Then, due to his incomparable, his perfected love and compassion for all sentient beings, he illuminated the path for others to follow. And this path was based on his own unmistaken experience. His unmistaken experience, this experience being unmistaken because it had led to the attainment of the perfected state of Buddhahood. He presented to us exactly how we need to train, like he did, to achieve that same result. So therefore we can understand that it was possible for an ordinary being, such as Buddha Shakyamuni, and subsequently so many others, so too is it possible for us.
Sanyi jimden de la nyamnyong garuchwa re na soso rana gi kom jap soso rana gi lobchong je soso rana kom jap na soso rana nyomo de pa tu du se de sanyi di nyamnyong chwe de nga zole dilam de chigro. Jisan da soso rana kale jamo che ngale deba che ne ngi sanyi le ge sha wa se de din sanyi le nyamnyong ma chung ro che ga di togume ba de sanyi kingo ro ba che de ne za ngale deba che wo re ngi sanyi le ge ho sanyi ya pa ge sha wa sung go ma jisan tupnam tiba chu mi zhe zhe dunga chagi mi se ni to ba xian la pu mi de chu yin dian ba de mi zhuo yu se de xie de ruwa o de tupnam tiba chu mi zhe xian zhe dunga chagi ni to ba xian la be chu yin dian ba de mi zhuo yu se de kyong zo mi lab zhe jie de kyong zo nyam len jie ba na sang yi guo tu tu re kyong zo ma jie ba na sang yi guo to tu ma re xie zang ni ya kyong sang yi le ya jie yo ma re ya kyong zo ma jie kan ya ma jie ba jie 날 대바지부지 되는 이 경우도 상일이야 친해 봐샤요 말에 숨고로 받아 제사 상기 냠용 그런 게 냠용 가르쳐 버렸으네 되니기 소수기 가야 맞게 봐지 미전다지기 아니 상일이야 계셔야지 요 말민도스 제다다 소수라는기 냠는지 곰 잡네 되네 녀모 봐 소소라 녀모디 매봐서 그래서지 제사 상기 그런 게 냠녀 되는 거 손에 뒤로 봐
The Buddha encouraged us through his example and his teachings that you yourselves have the power to purify your own mind. And you yourselves are the ones to do that. I cannot do it for you. And if I cannot, no one can, except yourselves. Through your efforts, you can purify your mind of the afflictions entirely. Through your efforts. No matter how much faith you have in your teacher, that alone cannot lead to your mind being purified. Buddha being an omniscient being, and a being who had become omniscient through cultivating the unmistaken path, he knew this. He knew this unmistakably. And therefore he taught that verse that I quoted earlier. I cannot remove your suffering with my hands. I cannot wash away your negativities with water. I, as the Buddha, cannot even bestow my realizations upon you. The only way I, as the Buddha, can help you is by teaching, illuminating the path, and you striving to liberate yourself. Here too, the Buddha taught dependence arising. There is a dependency between the teacher and the student, but the teacher cannot do it alone. The Buddha cannot do it alone. The student has to apply themselves through hearing, reflecting, and meditating, confident that transformation will come.
That's 소소기 저것도 dunga 세고에는 소소랑 칼라산 마도 소소 dunga 세투문도와 다 소소게 갖고미기 dunga지 마세고는 소소랑 주둥고도와 소소랑 마도는 미션다도는 내가 저기 갖고 마디 메와스투문다 디나시 소소기 마싱바디파 안에지 메와스고에는 소소랑 로종제의 신고를 신내 메와스고도 변해가 저기 레가로 신내가 신면나 소소마신바이나 소소랑랑게 레가디 장제 장바이나 한 소소 신루 데 마신바디 메바스요 데 롭종 카리니 소소랑랑게 장제네 소소기 마신바디 메바스요 마도 기행 캐바 슈슈베네 소소라 마자나 기행 캐바디용 나도 마신바디 메바스 신바스요 약간 민도와 지장한도 지팀비 디 글레가 카리나 아디 디나시 당아도 셈기 강아세다 셈기 동아세 디야 데 셈기 연된 수야디야 소소랑 제와도 세부로 와다디.
What the Buddha presented there, we know from society is true. Whatever worldly activity you think of, if one wants to achieve something, that mere wish is insufficient. One has to do something. If I'm sitting here and I'm a little thirsty, all of you can drink some water, it will have no impact on my thirst. I need to drink. If there's something we have an interest in and we want to become knowledgeable on, we have to study. It's the only way we're going to become knowledgeable. And if we go so far as to perhaps join a university, which is renowned for having great lecturers, no matter how knowledgeable and skilled our professors are, the student needs to apply themselves. No matter how much effort the teachers make, the student needs to apply themselves. So this is the way of the world, and it's certainly the way of the Buddha's path too.
어두세. 아니네 자당한 두스네 다 지게 녀모 방에 여봐 탈바다 탐지기미 토기 여봐 안에 지게 두스네 김전다 상지기 봐 송야다 김전디네 인자 당한도 다들 봐도 안에 저기 탈바 토미노 녀모야 방 토미노 상지고 방 토마도 지 가르친 라바레스 제가 저기 소소한 내가 심지셔변 교인 가르여라 가르치는 아주 탈바 마토바레 가르치는 상지고 방 마토바레 가르치는 녀모 보면서 마토바레스 당한도 두스네 지기 심주시 제호로 와다.
I hope this is very clear. What is attainable for all of us? But you may then well be thinking to yourselves, I accept it's attainable, but why has it not yet been attained? Why am I still so tormented by the afflictions? Why does my mind so readily get drawn towards objects of desire, repelled from objects that we find repulsive? Why am I not liberated from this?
이 교인가를 하버렸으네 나랑줄이야 삼로나려야 산지에 고방 톱고도 셈비기 눈바 되녀 삼로도 숙침을 내투요 말당한줄이야 아니다 녀몽바 되게 매바 소고도 셈비기 코르에 동화될 타고도 셈비기 탈두게 삼바디 코비기 교인 통야이기 녀몽바당 코비기 교인디 통야디 삼로디 숙침을 내죠 야보지 통요마다 하고요 말다 하 먹어래 라바라바로 중국만 당한주게 녀몽비 교인디 교인 레샤 삼비게 삼로디 템부지배 야고 마청아 김전지디래 김전지라 상계다 탈비고마 톱고도 선비 되녀기 듬버 숙치만 마게와 지디 디니비 마중하자 만족이 다대바도 녀모바 빠마토바다 타바다 탐지kimbe 고 마마토바디 균디지네 디게 라되 바로바다.
If you are asking that question, why is my progress still so limited? Why is it not where perhaps some years ago I would have expected it to be by this point? If you are asking that question, then I'd encourage you to keep asking that question. Why am I still so tormented by the afflictions, drawn with desire and repelled with disgust? Because through asking that question, you will recognize the answer, which is known, and you will apply the antidote, which you also have come to know. It's through not yet having come to gather sufficient knowledge on the Buddha Dharma and integrate it that one is where one is. Or to express that differently, we are where we are because of the level of knowledge we have acquired and integrated. And if we have the hope to be much further than we are right now, in particular, we have to keep gathering knowledge and reflecting on it, on the sufferings of samsara. Not just the coarse suffering, but in particular, the subtler levels of suffering. And their origin. Come to recognize the role the afflictions play in almost every thought. See how our aggregates, our body and our minds, are pervaded by suffering due to the presence of the afflictions. Have to come to recognize the faults of samsara vividly, so that what currently delights us and draws us, we recognize as that being a delusion, and that being what is keeping us bound. And what currently repels us in samsara, recognizing that that too is a delusion. Our true enemies are our afflictions, and they abide within. And this is what we need to recognize and strive to eradicate. And to the extent we have recognized that, we are not drawn to pleasurable objects or repulsed by undesirable objects. Those who have recognized this reality are largely, to a far larger extent, not impacted by the world in the same way. Their focus is on transforming their mind. So this is what we need to look at. This is what we need to look at within ourselves. Gather ever more knowledge and integrate it. And in this way, transformation will come.
산지에 고방 톱구도 세바다 탈바 톱구도 세베 되니 유튜브 슈침보데 말레바디 다디가르 제바레 람나 저기 산이 연된데야고 통도 하모거래 하고 말에 지산다 코위기 괭인데야고 하모고 디니게 레 지케 디이제네 아니 겐제네 산지 고방 톱되기 된베 되니 유튜브데 말레바래 베나 저기 잘라르 치네 직배 야구를 집에 연대인 시우톤 아딩하나 고우드 셈베 되니 둠바기 용그래 되니 둠바기나 안델 토비하게 된다라 내가 가르쳐 오거든 지금 여행을 가르쳐 배주 가르치고도 차상 탑람 제 죽투고 와 제가 잘라디게 연대네 마토나 디라고 셈베 되니 둠바기 두고 말 만들 내가 가르네 직바로 내가 가르네 직 제하고 셈베 디제하게 되바 둠바도 싶에 그 되니르 슈크심보 슈주에나 레가들레 제게 탑이람 제 고주용으로 제 레가들레 제게 되바 되니르게 되바 되니르메나 미잔다게 제고레 안 결혼하라 자고지게스나 아다nga 지금 메스니 라도 라고로 진짜 되니 듬범이야 베디나심 저게 산지 고방 톱구도 선비게 탈바 톱고서 되니 듬바도 슈크치바 말레 바인자 아니 내가 저기래스 지난다 타바 등이 두마 슈크치바다 산지 고방 톱고 두바 등이 레라 가르고 그래 람나 상기기 연대다 탈배 연대디게 통고거래 이 연대디 야네 양도 삼다 연 김제 삼다 연대디게 제바이나 하 연대디게 통바이나 오 다디 연대디 어디가 톱야고도 안 톱고 쓰면 등이 좀 바뀌고 그래 다양 코발에 균제 코에 누가 되는데도 누가데 균 되는데도 와서베 균 파서도 균디게 아고지 하고 봐이나 어다 균 될레데 마타는 탑면도 될레데 타고도 셈비게 타르게 삼을 내용을 제자디 탈바다 탐제킴에 연된 통야다 코위기 균 통야게 야고 통바이나 되네 탈바 등이 듬바다 산유고방 토 듬바 등이 듬발이고 그래 데 듬바들에 봐이나 디 토베기 자와 레갈 마소나 베주 가르치거나 딜 베주를 준주리 거래. 준주리나 아니 레갈 바지도 되네. 저기 넘균이 무티니 제게 삼된 띵이진 레투로와 되네 시럽 도시는 냠는지는 아주 달바다 탐지기 보고 톱토야 돼. 녀모 빵토야 띵 거래. 진짜 되네 장안줄래 귀인디 가르치네 달바다 탐지기 되니 눈바도 슉치고 이마도 디 괜찮아요. 디 귀인디 가르치네 달바다 탐지기 연대 야보 마통와 거기 능하기 귀인다 하모와 니 견제는 알아줄이야. dumba dangi dumba ya bole ma do di che ba le sa chi o du je dang sam dang wei ne.
What I just presented in the previous segment, this is indispensable for everyone who has some aspiration to spiritually develop, to come to recognize. And in particular, if you would have liked to be further progressed than what you find yourself now, this is what you need to reflect on. The sufferings of samsara and their origins in fine detail. But not that alone. This has a companion area of reflection that also needs to be cultivated. And that is to come to understand, through gathering knowledge and reflecting on it, the qualities of liberation and the benefits, the good qualities of an enlightened being. These two sections need to be studied well, integrated well. And this is why one needs to receive a wide variety of teachings, gathering knowledge on a wide variety of topics, so that one can come to understand not only the sufferings of samsara in their fine detail, as well as their origins, but also the qualities and benefits of attaining a state liberated from suffering, and the qualities of an enlightened being. To the extent that one has developed that within oneself, one will not be enthused by the joys of the world. To the extent that those two understandings have not arisen in one's mind, one will find the world delightful, pleasurable, and attractive. Those who have meditated well on these two sections of Dharma, their way of thinking is completely transformed. What they value and prioritize has completely transformed. Their physical and verbal efforts coming from this transformed mind are very different. Whatever they are engaging in, their mind is focused on not coming under the influence of the afflictions, and ensuring that virtuous minds that are in accordance with the mind of a liberated being, these are manifest. Such a person with mindfulness and introspection always has a mind on the Dharma. Such a person has enthusiasm for the Dharma, and with ease they have already turned away from distraction to the delights of this world. And with this enthusiasm, this joyous perseverance, the attainment of calm abiding and the wisdom realizing emptiness is relatively easy for them. Persevering with joy makes the attainment of goals which for us seem quite far off. For such a person who has developed this foundation, those goals are achievable in this very life. Therefore, I encourage you to reflect, to gather knowledge and reflect well on these two sections, the sufferings of samsara and their origins, as well as the benefits and the good qualities of liberation and an enlightened being.
아다 나주 디니시 디니 자다 나주 지금 나주 코위기 견 통고 말에 다 마토베 김제를 장하는 도시네 지금 아주 양게 심주기 다 마토 같이 통음인데 가르치기도 새벽에 심주기 제외나 다 나주에 가르치고라서네 체디기 디기 주야다 돈달이야 체디기 나주게 디짱야 레갈야 안지 고호되고 와당 저기 지 điều chỉ cái lẽ lẽ đấy cũng người thấp sĩ đủ lo thấp sĩ đã chính anh chỉ chế định là đi pa chỉ cái用cái pa chỉ tham gia rồi đã đủ现在加上đi đơn đơn嘢đi原点讲讲通这đi捐嘛捐的这个嘛说내가 저기 강바 약고 싫잖아 난 기호 차기래서 대한 약고 해서 안 둘러다 난 지지 내가 대한데 변조 약고 싫잖아 대한 기호 차기래서 안 바사지 하고 참여를 니야 기우체 차사 연된다고 그러가지고 균균에다고 연된 게 따지고 그러고 제가 데니기 연된 게 따지게 삼노디기 디 삼노디리에 아니 디냐냐라 자와 체디기 자와 디수냐냐라 파제제네 아주 심지 뇨모 바세제 탈바세 탐지 김바세야디 디 삼노 코로 콜고 말와 디 토비에게 삼노 코로 땡고 말 가서 체디기 연된 이 지간주기 딜레 체디기 뒤에는 파 지주비에게 디자냐 삼다들 지산 내를 꽤 맞다비 임센디로 와다 지산 디기 꽤 차대요 해제로 와다간죠 지산 다 내려야 안 가르 고고에서는 지산 체대단 깨와 치마시네 치마도 배 다른 거라서 배는 아주기 디링 이미직당 마오바스나 다 디링 이미직디 통통체 마오바스도 로망고로 와다 마오죠 지산 디링당 마오바인데 가르기에 체지고라서는 마오바디 기체지고 그래서 지상 저 디린 칼라 레가 다지셔야지 다들 칼라 디린 칼라 사야게 된다 레가리고 말 상인 나이 마음버게 지게 라야게 된다 레가리고로 와 어디나시 지상 디니 이제 체대당 치마인 치마 타는 거 지상 체디기다 자와 저게 또 디기 주게 두고고 되나 쪼디 지겨 말해 쪼디 아니 마음바나 디기 요야게 디기데 쪼와 삼다 아니 체델이야 뭔도 튕겨주어야 된 디기주베데 쇼얼파 삼다지 오래야지 제가 디니 이제 교인디 가려서는 가 저기 체디기 교인디 안에 가서 콜비 롱절이야 교인마다 저 연장 야 다주변자 안디기 안도 최진교 말에 최 마덴바디 지르 최 마덴나 타바 탐지기 먹고 봐 토지 땡을 좀 말려봐 디리에스 제가 디니 이제 아니 도슝고래서 대장 가서 삼다변에 디더로 와다 직세디게 디니가 디고도 니고도 직직 제고 직 참여로도 다지 진가 갈래들 흘려 제고서 디간야 섬등 안 저기 다 도스전에 제 도스지로 잡아나 되네 짐주 제배나 가지고 되네 임바데 가지고 제 소소라는 게 세부하고 도야 자기도
If you find yourself in the position that the sufferings of samsara are not vividly clear to you, the question will come, why not? Especially if it's been some years of hearing these teachings. Why have I not yet come to realize this? And the reason is because what consumes our mental energy, and therefore our subsequent verbal communication and physical activities, is the happiness of this life. Thinking, for example, what's for lunch? I hope it's this, I hope it's not that. Thinking about, then later thinking, oh, lunch was not so good, lunch was really nice. The pleasures of this life dominate our mind. Thinking about our holidays, where we'd like to go tonight or tomorrow. Thinking about seeing nice things, being with people we enjoy. And certainly if one is looking at moving home, or that whole thought process that leads to that decision, and then subsequently when one moves, dominates one's mind. And this is largely focused on the pleasures of this life. What is entirely absent from this thought process is seeing the harm that focusing on the pleasures of this life brings. So there is no even balance here. We are seeing the pleasures of this life as something really worthwhile to put our energy into achieving, not being cognizant of the harm that the focusing, our overemphasis on the attainment of these pleasures brings. And being in this position, thoughts of the Dharma are secondary, they are quite distant. And certainly thoughts of future lives are quite distant. Because we are thinking about today, next week, this year. We are not thinking about future lives. We are not engaging in our various activities with the thought of accumulating causes for future lives. We are engaging in these activities, enjoying the pleasures that they bring. The focus being on the pleasures of this one life. So this is important to really reflect on well, not just on your cushion, not just here in the class, but whilst going through one's life. Be aware of your mental process. Listen to what you're talking about and see if what I'm saying is true. Watch your mind. See what it's drawn towards, what it's repulsed from, and ask yourself, is this really in accordance with the mind striving for liberation? Every time you recognize that it's not the case, then this is a success. Then you turn your mind to the Dharma. We need the pleasures of this life. We need the comforts of this life. But our overemphasis on them, this is completely out of proportion. The amount of particular mental energy that goes into this is completely out of proportion. So this, I encourage you to look at for yourselves. And if you do look well, it will become clear why one's progress is where it is, as opposed to where one perhaps wishes it was. And this then is a step to use to encourage oneself to transform what we value and prioritize, and rather go through our lives with a focus on attaining mental transformation and liberation for the sake of others.
Dine nza di kyun di yago thongma thongwa zan di jizang ngan zuki sangye ki ngan zu lamden chi de karanang gora sene jizang ngan zu dunga se le dunga yu dunga yu yu dunga kyaba duji dunga se dunga riksu myo res jizang ngan zu jikdin ba tsetilya ngan zu anjige kala sa dan kyamjang doya dan digi tu tu shungu res di digi di debo di delang la yonga di delo yu yu dunga re dengi dewa di ma res ko nega 중세 대화 지요데 이나 남성 규신 동안 내용을 대 띵이 대화 말에 나서를 가로서 띵이 대화도 게디네 대화지 고고레스 지산 띵이 대화 말레스 지산 딜 규유 동안 라게레스 이나다 나서리아 대화딜 규유 동안 마도 띵이 대화데 가서 녀에 매바래 봐 이나다 규유 동안 띵 아주 용고고리 배지 땅고고리 대 이내야 쪼고 디냐냐 삼다제 띵이 대화 토백에 삼마다 되네 디 경우레스 제산 띵이 대화 토백이 또 삼로 띵이 대화 토백이 된다를 배수지 아니 니링이야 하는 아주게 네 제규 동아디에 아주리아 배수다나 지고래서 지슨 거로 제산 되네 되네자 당 아주게 류딜랑 아주 죽부배 다고 휴가 제산디 규르 가서 차와두지 동아래서 대 동아래서 이네 네 띵이 대화도 말해서 제산 아주게 수부 다고 자고래데 이네야 뭐 조섬다야디 디수부 짱짱 섬마다와체 치매기 몽비게 섬마다제 제사다 나주 넘기네 나 체디기 수부 짱짱을 중급제 섬다데 거와 제사 디네 인자 다 조드 가서 몽바나 균 탐제된 제위기 풍보라기 풍보라기 주야기 수기 변나 사지기 수주고다 아니 지금 죽고 주야 되게 배시 조체 나 저기 세대리야 류딘데 비주 당고 거래스 제가 디네자다 간제레 디수 띵기 동아ren 지나 동아레마도 띵기 대화 말에 제가다 아주 쪼디 가르스는 탈바다 탐지킴에 띵기 대화 도에 배주 쪼체 한 디가라 다 내가 아주 가베지 당고스네 대대 그 동아세티다 하는 아주 풍고되게 배주 당고디 배주 디세고레마도 마오바네 띵이 되어 탈바 탐지김에 삼로 균에 개와 치마 균에 삼마다마지 체디게야 예제 되베네 아니 개와 치마다 탈바 탐지김이 주베기 유사고 말에 유마사나 제부죽투 말에스 제가 아주 너트 디쇼고래 제가 되니 인자 당보 코로나 두수제 델이야 균다지 델이야네 예 띵이 가서 게디나 개와 치마다 탈탐 마다마 체디게냐 삼다교 말에스 두승거로 봐. 되네 인상 아주 럼림날마 당보 냠린 체되고 다 냠린 림바파 당보 고소되네 치와미다 바삼다야. 되네 가소메 동화 삼다야. 되네 코르 동화 삼다야. 되네 sem제 탐지기 동화 세야 삼다야. 누진 림바시도 아주 승거로 봐 냠린 체다 삼다 당다데. sem제 탐지 코르 동화를 자지야 상예고 방을 뒤에 삼다. 디타바치 벨람디 냠린 세우 자고로 봐.
Sure, all of you in your meditations, you generate a powerful motivation to accumulate causes for good rebirths, to accumulate causes for liberation and for enlightenment. So what I'm encouraging you here is to have such a motivation, not just in your daily meditations, but to have it manifest ever more throughout your daily activities. Because it's to the extent that one has such a motivation, whether to accumulate causes for good rebirth or liberation or enlightenment, that one does accumulate such causes. One can engage in the same activities, but absent of such a motivation, those activities do not become causes for a good rebirth, liberation or enlightenment. But to the extent that one has such a motivation, and the stronger that motivation is, the stronger the causes are that we accumulate. So this is my motivation, my intention behind this advice that I'm giving you. And if you already have such a motivation present throughout the day, in all your conversations and activities, then that will have come about independent on the meditations I've been describing. If you find, though, that we're not on the meditation cushion, not when specifically thinking about the Dharma, that those thoughts are not manifest or in the back of one's mind, then what I encourage you to do is to meditate, in particular, on the sufferings of samsara. When Buddha Shakyamuni was illuminating the path, he presented the 3 types of suffering. The first, that of physical mental pain. We all want to renounce those causes. But what I encourage you to focus on is the second, the suffering of transient happiness. This is where our confusion lies. With this mind that is obsessed about achieving worldly happiness, having pleasant food, pleasant company, engaging in conversation with people who agree with our views, all of this is transient happiness. And when you think about it, you recognize it, that happiness comes and it goes. But this is the best we have ever experienced. All the happiness since the beginning of time we have experienced has arisen and it's gone. We have yet to experience lasting happiness. Never having experienced lasting happiness, it makes it that much more difficult to strive to achieve it. But to give rise to a mind striving for lasting happiness, we have to have reflected on these 2 sections I mentioned earlier, the sufferings of samsara and its origins, and the benefits of liberation and enlightenment, lasting happiness. So whilst we're gathering this knowledge, I encourage you to reflect on the faults of samsara, in particular that of transient happiness. The outcome to aim for is to not see the happiness of this world as repulsive, but to see it in its true light. Enjoy the pleasures of company and a nice meal and somewhere comfortable to live, without the mind being obsessed by this, so that when it fades, one doesn't suffer, and one's mental energy isn't so dominated to achieving more happiness that will fade. So here it's about a rebalancing. And this comes together with seeing the faults of transient happiness. The fault being that it deceives us, thinking that this is the best we can achieve, that this is worthy of achieving, worthy of striving for. That fault we need to eradicate. Enjoy the happiness without believing that it's worthy of striving for. This then opens us up to have far more mental space to think about future lives, liberation and enlightenment. And thereby, when we go about our daily activities, we can engage in these same conversations and physical activities, but doing so motivated by bringing an end to the afflictions. Do so motivated by wanting to be of true benefit to others. This is why the Lamrim is laid out in the way that it is. First, is presented the doorway to the Dharma. To enter into the Dharma, it's imperative to have reflected well on the impermanence of this life. That is the doorway. As long as one is deceived by the thought, I have time, one cannot truly enter into the Dharma. Thereafter, the Lama presents, one has to reflect on the suffering of lower realms. Through the initial meditation on the impermanence of life, when that's achieved, a great strength of mind and an enthusiasm has arisen. Recognizing the sufferings of the lower realms adds to that, adds to our focus. And then, thirdly, reflecting on the sufferings of samsara in its entirety, as that develops within us, again, progressively, our enthusiasm, our strength of mind, our determination grows ever further, and our distraction from what is meaningless, essenceless, fades. And then fourthly, the focus in the Lamaram turns based on or in dependence on these prior realizations, the situation of others, and our responsibility to others. And in that way, bodhicitta, the determination to become a Buddha for others, arises.
Dine inza da ngārāng zhūra jīk samdāwe na ngārāng jīki ngārāng zhūki dūshchi na jīk nyāshē jē dūshchi dū ngārāng zhūki jizāng gyāwa chīmā da tharbā da tamjē kīmbi kī tūki yōpa kānis tūki yōpi kī dine kī ngārāng zhūki lobchōng jē dūshchi dū da jīki dine kī lobchōng jē dū ngārāng zhūki gulōng lé samlō na shūkin tē da ngārāng zhūki gēchōr chē lé ngārāng zhūki 야 다시 지고로 당하는 삼다베나 다도 삼다 당하는 제디게 지지로 지켜베나라 님이 지래 주진 20접시 나네 당하는 주제가 지금 삼바이나 유유 슈차도로 와다 아니 님이 지래 로직 나라가지 지고로 다 주지 접세베나 베 유유레 네 이내다 유유레데 다 직초직 삼다베나 zemli 나라야 미가 제요레 and zemli na semjen khatse yore mi da dunro da semjen mi je ba be gyaja guji tamba dunro wa mi di gyaja jusuru chagro wa da gyaja juna ne an zogi da de ne ge da mi da ne da ji mang che de so so ran ge lega da an ji ge choyu tingge da ji je zhuo ni ma do sem gi tho ya sem ya dunga 용타다 규데니스인데 리고레 셈기에네 뇽모바디게 마메바서 뇽보데니스 띵구레 세베게 삼다제 두스치네 장한디 뇽뇽슈 차르바다 미밀레 야자집에는 야자 굽진나네 야자 주스로 차마다 네 야자 굽지나마데 바치 계주로데 데네게 로좀 마싱하나 차고로 바다 소수게 지사 데네게 삼다베네 아 저기 지당 아 제디 니메치다도 세베데 뇽뇽을 차고를 때 지천에도 삼다나 배 야구로시 배내가 제 야구시 차지가 진짜 니네상 소소라네 내가 저네 때 제바디 다 소소 뽑기야다 소소이네 안 수지 디야고 중샤선 비게 가고미야 진짜 니네자다 맞지 니네 제바디 무티자 소소라 지긴세 비게다 듬바 셈슈기야데 안도스네 맞지 도스네 제바는다 다 두두선 즉 니마 안 다와 로 데네시 로 망부치네 지대는 지두스 사연데 마마마 책으로와 지자다 체딜이야 아주 데니 집에 가지 곰슈 곰바다 데니게 직 숙체 요번에 데 마마바네 개와 치마이네 디기 kiến 지네 아주야 체딜이야 규사고로 규사반데 제부주에 인으로 와다 규에나 제부주고래 유메나 제우면 지자가 규사고래 지자 데니자 가지 체딜이야 두스 제지어데 아주 규디 누바체 차고래 dine kiawa chimana suine dine ki chega gohap chibura da she mogara chagorwa dine zedang du dusine da sosugi rangi sosolia bobakia da sosrana le chisu iran chia an sosrangi oduche di yakure de momba de mutijin dine ya chikin sebigi dumba semjuki edi an ye chimbo chagorwa.
So I'm sure, in dependence on this teaching, you will have been thinking about the quality of your mind, and I encourage you to continue to do so. You've heard many teachings, you know what constitutes a good motivation and how to generate one. So I encourage you to ask yourself now and continuously from now, what is my motivation? Is it in accordance with the Dharma or not? Now ask yourself, in general, in the day, in the whatever number of waking hours one has, where is one's thoughts? What is one thinking about? One may be engaging in a wide number of worldly activities. One has to sustain life and engage with others. But what is my mental process? Is it about this life, or is it beyond this life? Ask yourself that, and then recognize that the quality of the virtuous activities one is engaging in is dependent on the quality of the motivation. And this, I think for most of us, will lead to an enthusiasm to develop the quality of our mind, to ensure that when we're engaging in our daily activities, that the motivation we cultivated in our meditation is manifest, is present. But now what I want to add to my encouragement for you to engage in this meditation is at the start of the meditation, I'd encourage you to think in the following way. Because what I don't want anyone the conclusion anyone to come to is to think, oh, I'm not good enough, I haven't done well enough, and to bring oneself down. It would just be stupid. That just limits oneself. We're here to develop wisdom, to recognize where we are and our potential. So don't allow yourself to become dispirited. This is coming to a mistaken conclusion. To prevent this happening, I encourage you to start your meditation in the following way. Reflect that in this world, there are probably many trillions of beings. The vast majority are animals. Animals are pervaded by stupidity. They have no idea of the range of suffering or why they are suffering. Beyond the coarsest of levels, they have no idea and they have no ability to do anything about it. Compared to animals, humans are small in number, they're nearly 8 billion now, but far, far less than animals. But for the vast majority of humans, their attention to the causes of suffering, whilst much better than animals, is still very limited. Humans are very aware of causes of suffering, but only on the coarsest of levels, particularly the suffering of physical and mental pain. That's it. Humans have a far greater capacity than animals to deal with this, but it still has its limits. But amongst the 8 billion humans, it's only a very small number who are looking at the mind as being the source of our suffering, the afflictions of the mind to be precise. And amongst those who have recognized the role that the afflictions play in suffering, it's a far smaller number that have recognized that the ignorance of true grasping is at their root. And not having recognized the root of their suffering, there is no way they can eradicate it through cultivating an antidote. So therefore, start every meditation with this recognition that you are amongst very, very few, those who have truly a precious human rebirth. Because you have encountered these unmistaken teachings, where the root cause of all suffering has been identified and the unmistaken antidote. Recognizing that gives one confidence, because there are solutions. And take that confidence, then reflect on the sufferings of samsara, particularly the suffering of transient happiness and all else that are mentioned. Because the result of this meditation needs to be an enthusiasm, a joy, focused on the Dharma and keeping that ever present throughout the day. So thank you. We'll conclude there for this morning. If you have further questions, then please feel free to ask. Then thank you and enjoy your lunch.